Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex, coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... This weekend, I'm reviewing The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Now, before I get started, I would like to note that this had been gifted to me by the booktuber known as Spooky Noodles, and if you haven't checked out his work before, I've included a link to his channel in the description section of this video, so be sure to check him out. Also, aside from this book having some fond memories tied to it because it was a gift, I will always remember this as being the book that I read while I was on vacation with my in-laws and my husband as we were staying in a cabin in the mountains in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Which, needless to say, this book was already very unsettling to start with, but being in this atmosphere made this work absolutely terrifying. However, I didn't experience the horror of this book alone because I buddy read this with two of my good online friends who are Hanny and John, which, as expected, I thoroughly enjoyed our buddy read because of the deep dives that we had, but I also loved how the ending just screwed with us and we were left debating exactly what happened. So, with that said, I would like to thank Spooky Noodles for gifting this to me, and I would like to thank Hanny and John for buddy reading this with me, and if any of you are watching, I hope you enjoy this review. But without further ado, let's join Wynn and her fathers at their cabin and see what happens when four strangers come a-knocking. The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay introduces a young girl named Wynn who is enjoying a family getaway with her two dads, Andrew and Eric, at their cabin. And while her dads are out on the back deck relaxing, she's in the front yard collecting grasshoppers. Yet their peaceful day soon comes to an end when a stranger by the name of Leonard approaches her and explains, after gaining her trust, that this is not her fault and she has the perfect family. But the three of them are about to have to make some hard decisions. And while Leonard is trying to keep Wynn calm, two women and a man walk up the road towards them holding barbaric weapons. But before they can get too close, Wynn is able to run inside and warn her fathers that there are scary people in the front lawn. Then, upon the family demanding that the strangers leave, it's revealed that there is no cell service here, the strangers have cut their phone lines, and Andrew has left their gun in their SUV. Also, it was previously noted that the closest cabin is 2 miles away and society is a 25-minute drive. From there, the strangers invade their cabin and tie Wynn's fathers up. Then, after they're trapped, Leonard presents to them a proposition that won't only affect their lives, but it might also affect the entire world. Published in 2018, The Cabin at the End of the World won a Bram Stoker Award in 2019, and in that same year, it won the Locus Award for Best Horror Novel. Currently, it has been adapted into a movie by M. Night Shyamalan called Knock at the Cabin, which is due for release in 2023. In an interview by Jonathan Hatfull for sci-fi.co.uk, Paul Tremblay explained his inspiration for The Cabin at the End of the World started with him doodling a cabin in his idea notebook, which this caused him to begin thinking about horror's home invasion subgenre. And while interested in that concept, he considered everything would be much more interesting if this occurred during the possibility of an apocalypse. In regards to the ambiguity in The Cabin at the End of the World, Tremblay explained he has always enjoyed literature that presents an uncertainty about everyday life, and since the character of Andrew is a non-believer who refuses to budge from his convictions, the strangers are firm in their visions and they also refuse to budge. By presenting these polar opposites, Tremblay hoped this approach would work as a reflection of the anxiety produced in our age of misinformation. While Tremblay outlined and wrote 50 pages of The Cabin at the End of the World during the 2016 presidential election, he finished it after the election's aftermath, and his goal was to produce a work that was an allegory for current political anxieties. Fun facts! Here's a few things you might not know about Paul Tremblay. Aside from Paul Tremblay authoring multiple novels and short story collections, he has written essays and short stories which have appeared in the LA Times, Entertainment Weekly Online, and numerous anthologies. Also, he is on the board of advisors for the Shirley Jackson Awards. Tremblay has been classified in the postmodern literary movement, which began in the second half of the 20th century, and creators of this subgenre use it as an opportunity to rebel against established literary principles and explore their own feelings regarding major events in our external world. These works include, but are not limited to, metafiction, reader involvement, and to avoid traditional endings. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoiler segment of this book, which, if you haven't read this before, I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So if you would like to click away, all you have to do is scroll down to the comments, and you'll see that I have a pinned comment at the top with the timestamp in it. Once you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this, so ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about a few moments that caught me off guard. First up is Redmond's death. Now, prior to this, Wynn's family had been presented with the concept that the world will end unless Andrew kills Eric, or vice versa. And even though they have this choice, Leonard stresses to them that he and the other strangers were thrown into this and they had no choice whatsoever. Also, they aren't taking any enjoyment out of this because they don't have hatred in their heart. Then, as we learn about the visions that the strangers had received, we discover if a sacrifice isn't given, a plague will descend, the sky will fall, cities will drown, and darkness will cover earth. Well, since Andrew and Eric refuse to choose, the strangers gather around one of their own by the name of Redmond, and with their weapons, they beat him in the head until he's nothing but a bloody pulp. Then, after Redmond dies, it's actually noted that Eric had seen a morphed figure form next to Redmond, and when Leonard turns on the television, it reports that a massive earthquake has hit the islands between Alaska and Russia, and because of its impact, it's causing a tsunami to hit the Hawaiian Islands with a 15-foot wave, which this is all very similar to what Leonard had predicted. So I was completely surprised to see that these strangers would kill one of their own if Andrew and Eric didn't make a choice. Like, I had honestly feared that the strangers were going to torture the hell out of the family by using these barbaric and grisly methods, but thankfully that wasn't the case. Also, until Eric saw the morphed figure appear next to Redmond, I did not think there was anything supernatural going on. Like, I really believed that this group of strangers was nothing more than a delusional, fanatical cult who had come together online and was feeding off of each other's insanity. But when Eric actually saw that figure appear, I was like, okay, so is this really happening? Or is this vision a result from Eric having a concussion? The next moment that came out of nowhere was Wynn's death, which leading up to this, Andrew was able to untie his hands and feet while everyone was preoccupied with Eric. Then, after he was able to make a break for it, he ran out to their SUV, grabbed their gun, and returned inside the cabin to try and save the day. But after Andrew and Leonard get into a fight, they accidentally shoot and kill Wynne. Y'all, I'm not gonna lie, this moment ripped my heart out. Like, when I read it, I had no other choice but to put the book down and blankly stare. And yeah, I understand that any child death is very horrific, but because of the character development that the author had placed in this family and the high hopes that I had that they would walk away as a family unit, all of that was shattered and taken away by just one simple sentence. And as I sat there trying to accept what had just went down, I realized that because of this turning point, no matter what happened next, this book would not have a happy ending. But as much as I hate to admit it, unfortunately, I do think that this scene was necessary as it did impact the ending, which I will touch on that in just a moment. And last is the ending. So at this point, Andrew, Eric, and one of the strangers by the name of Sabrina are the only ones left alive. Meanwhile, the news has been reporting about tsunamis, an outbreak, and planes crashing. Also, even though Andrew hasn't had any supernatural experiences, Eric has started seeing weird things ever since Redmond's death, which among those is the vision of flies covering the cabin and Wynne's dead body. Plus, during this time, Sabrina has started to doubt everything that Leonard has said, and she's decided to help the husbands escape. Well, since the tires on Eric and Andrew's SUV are slashed, Sabrina guides them to Redmond's truck, and after she hands them the keys, she kills herself. But because of everything that's gone down, Eric now believes what the strangers had prophesized. However, since Andrew is a skeptic and he hasn't experienced what Eric did, he reasons to Eric that the visions were caused by stress and his concussion, which because of that, the world isn't ending. Then, once he talks Eric down, Eric decides not to kill himself. And as Eric tosses aside the gun that he was going to use to commit suicide, the storm that had been brewing since that morning starts to intensify. Then, out of nowhere, the book simply ends as the sky starts to darken. I was completely surprised that the conclusion of this book had such an open ending. And even though a lot of online reviewers hate it for this reason, I actually loved it because it screwed with my head that much more. Also, Hanny, John, and myself went around in circles in regards to if this was really the apocalypse or not, and even though we couldn't agree on one specific answer, after debate, we did decide, even if this wasn't the apocalypse, the world that Andrew and Eric knew did in fact end after Wynne was killed. But to determine if the world was actually ending or not, I think the answer lies in the eye of the beholder. Like, for example, if the person reading this was atheist or a religion other than Christianity, then they could possibly see this being nothing more than a shared delusion where Andrew remained level-headed throughout. However, if the person reading this is Christian, then there's a good possibility that they could interpret everything as being legitly biblical. But personally, I like to imagine that the world ended because that just seems way more catastrophic, and it seems like there would just be a whole line of horror following that, which would totally freak me out. I would like to take this opportunity to bitch about Redmond. Now, out of everyone in this book, he was the only one who truly felt like a gleeful asshole about the situation. Like, I understand a stressful circumstance can make a person crack inappropriate jokes. I'm guilty of that as well. But in my opinion, I think he went a step too far. Especially when he was trying to, like, play with Wynn's family by saying, we're coming in one way or another. Which, his tone was playful, but he sure as shit wasn't. And then as the book advances, Andrew discovers that Redmond is actually this homophobic jackass named Jeff from his past. And Jeff, back in the day, had called Andrew the F-slur, then cracked a beer bottle on the back of his head. And also, we have how Redmond is a total male chauvinist pig to the ladies in this group. And in my opinion, this is the prime example of someone who is a short dick man who is insecure about everything he is, so he has to take out his insecurities on those who he perceives to be the lesser of the species. The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay was one hell of a frightening read where I quickly became connected with the characters. Aside from that, Hanny, John, and myself noticed where this book presented a lot of symbolism, and it focused on themes such as ideological differences, cult mentality, religion, and much more. Character-wise, I quickly felt concerned for the protagonists because they were so well written. And like what Hanny said, I believe the reason why I became so quickly invested is because since the beginning of the book, Tremblay sneaks in a stream of consciousness with Wynn, Andrew, and Eric. And he does it so effortlessly, we're gaining information on them without it being a character development overload. So early on, we're able to see what these characters had been through, where they had come from, and what brought them to this current circumstance. And for me, that just pulled me in a whole hell of a lot faster. Also, not gonna lie, when Leonard was talking to Wynn, the level of dread that I experienced, I have no word for it. And the last time I felt this way with characters interacting was when I had seen the remake of Cape Fear and the Robert De Niro character was trying to groom the Juliette Lewis character. So, because of how that played out, my heart was beating out of my chest. As I said, symbolism is big with this book. Like, for starters, the number 7 shows up repeatedly. And at the beginning of the story, Wynn, who is 7 years old, has collected 7 grasshoppers. Then when the strangers come, they knock 7 times on the cabin door. And once they enter the cabin, there are 7 people in total among the antagonist and protagonist. Also, as the book progresses, we eventually see where 7 planes have crashed. Now, in a biblical sense, 7 represents completion and perfection. Also, 7 is said to be the formation of God's Word, and as the Bible teaches, God rested on the 7th day after he created Earth. But among everything that 7 represents, it does have a darker side to it as well. Such as in Revelation, it's noted that 7 angels pour out 7 bowls of God's wrath after they blow 7 trumpets. And truth be it, that's just a little snippet of what 7 represents in the Bible. If I were to cover everything in this segment, yeah, we would be talking about an hour long. Also, since I mentioned grasshoppers, John pointed out to Hanny and I that the grasshoppers in this book felt like foreshadowing. And he said the reason why was because after Wynn trapped 7 grasshoppers in her jar, 7 people get trapped inside of the cabin. Plus, he explained that grasshoppers represent needing to recognize one's own instincts and spiritual requirements. Aside from that, as I continued to read, I began to spiral out in regards to the weapons that the strangers carried. And this is because I remember hearing that it's believed angels carry savage weapons. Well, even though I don't believe these characters were angels, I did a Google search on their name and discovered that names like Leonard, Redmond, Sabrina, and Adrian actually have a biblical and spiritual significance tied to them. But what really freaked us out is, as I was reading up on Leonard's name, we discovered that his name meant lion-hearted, and I came across a saint by the name of Saint Leonard, who is the patron saint of prisoners. Also, as a side note, even Wynn's name is mentioned in the King James Version of the Bible. As a matter of fact, it's in Leviticus 22:22. Also, even Eric and Andrew have biblical mention. Theme-wise, I believe the main focus of this book regards ideological differences and how those differences affect the characters and the readers. Like, for example, we have where Andrew's character is more of a skeptic, and he really doesn't believe that this is the apocalypse. But on the other hand, we have the strangers who firmly believe they are receiving visions from a higher power. Then there's Eric, who is a Catholic, and because of what's going on, he does start to receive visions as well. But we don't necessarily know if these visions are because of him being Catholic or if it's because of the concussion that he received. Regardless, Leonard's character was really convincing, and I'm not exactly sure when this happened to me, but at some point in the book, I honestly started to believe him, and because of how this all came about, it really felt like he had groomed me. But as I was saying, even though Eric does receive some visions and he starts to believe the strangers, Andrew remains a skeptic and he doesn't receive any visions. Also, it's mentioned that Andrew had previously taught in his class how the idea of an apocalypse can affect people. So, because of these two polar opposites remaining devout in their beliefs, it puts us in the middle of everything, and it's really a strong tug of war for the reader. As I previously mentioned, I truly felt like I had been groomed by Leonard's character because he was so convincing. And as I continued to read, I realized that the subject of cult mentality was strong in this book, which, as we all know, the goal of any cult is to bring you onto their side and to try to manipulate you into believing them. Next up is the subject of religion, which I really can't elaborate on due to spoilers, and to be honest, I hope I haven't revealed too much already. But yeah, religion is pretty strong in this book, and it does tie into the cult mentality, or at least I think it does. And since these strangers have come together in regards to biblical purposes, it really made me feel vulnerable because it caused me to recall some of the times that I had been confronted by religious fanatics. Which, to be honest, if you want to be a religious fanatic, so be it. Go ahead and do that. But just don't push your beliefs off on me. Also, I did find it to be really interesting that, considering how we're presented with these circumstances in the book, that the protagonists were a same-sex couple who had a child. And I really did appreciate the family dynamic that was shown here and how these characters weren't written to be these campy stereotypes. Overall, Cabin at the End of the World didn't gross me out, but it was very creepy and it did scare the ever-loving living hell out of me because with how this book ended, it haunted me for the rest of my vacation in Pigeon Forge, and it stayed with me long after I returned home. The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay was an intense book that kept us guessing. And even though the three of us loved this work, I'm sure it's not for everyone because of how open the ending felt and how you have to determine what happened next. But aside from that, this felt like it was a very original take on the home invasion subgenre, and it was something that I could not put down. So if you're looking for a book that will really strike dread into your core, I do highly recommend The Cabin at the End of the World. Now that it's time to close out my video, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account as well, I have a link available in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. And if there is a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll include that as well. Also, I do have a $10 tier available, where for $10 a month I'll still give you the shout out as you see here, but I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month I'll send you over one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off, do whatever you like. So if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can have a good time together. Also, if you would like to follow me on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are all in the description section of this episode, as well as a link to my Amazon wishlist in case you want to spoil me. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I know this is Labor Day weekend, so I hope everyone's having a great Labor Day. I hope everyone has a great week, and sweet nightmares.